we ran out and bought books. We have a pretty good library, not a great library, pretty good library. And we immediately bought the chip rack, and we bought James' edition number, the second edition, and we looked at the books, and I kept saying, wow, this is really good, this is good, I got these 2 books and all that sort of stuff. And I kept saying, oh, it'd really be interesting to have these authors let us know how they did things, how they did their research, what they did, why he has pictures, why he doesn't have pictures, why he has this price, why he has that price, when's this edition coming out, when that's edition coming out. And to make this a very short introduction, this is Michael Knapp, one of the 3 authors of the chip rack and the gaming table. This is James Campiglia, one of the 2 authors of the, let's see, the official U.S. guide, the U.S. official guide to chips and whatever it is. Okay, the titles are too long. And we are really delighted that these 2 gentlemen have agreed to appear on the same stage at the same time, aren't we? And the short little story is I sent them simultaneous emails, and I asked them both to appear. And I won't tell you exactly what they both replied, but it was like, he did? And the other one said, he did? And they were both stuck with appearing. So without further ado, have you guys decided who's going first? No. Okay. We'll do it alphabetically, because that way no one can argue. James will appear first. We're going to hold questions and answers until both of the people have made their presentation, and then you can have at him. Oh, and he's asked me to interpret his notes that he made. I can't read his handwriting, and neither can he.
I did these on the airplane flying back into town here. I've been traveling. I'm always traveling. This time I wasn't hunting for chips. Family and I went on a trip for 4th of July to Mount Rushmore, see the fireworks, and hang out in South Dakota, the beautiful Black Hills. And I bought a souvenir, got a big rock and a bunch of trees and a house. So I had to go back there to see if they're continuing to finish this house, of which we're supposed to move into August 20th in the beautiful Black Hills of South Dakota. I don't think they'll be done in time. They said it'll be move-in condition. I think I'll be camping out on the hills with the land around me that I bought and amongst the trees and rocks. But I'll be closer to Michael Knapp up in Montana, because I actually don't live in Montana. Some people think I live in Montana. One of the kids' badge said Montana, but my parents moved up there. So I'll be 500 miles away from my parents, then my brother and the kids, and that's close enough. And I'll still be chip collecting. Recently completed my deadwood collection, which I'm real excited about. I believe I have all the deadwood chips now, thanks to Alan Myers and selling me his beautiful collection of deadwood chips. And I want to continue working on the deadwood chips and the Nevada chips, and of course coming out with another book that I think we all are in need of for the hobby. Books keep everything exciting. So I will get a book done eventually when I'm snowbound up in the winter there. I'll have not much to do. So in Santa Barbara, it's just the weather's too nice. I'm just out doing things and I can't concentrate on a book. So that's why I haven't got the book done yet. I think they wanted us to talk about how I formatted the book. Let's see, I got that in a note here somewhere. Let's see, the size of the book. That was an important factor. So it's an easy to carry book to bring to the shows, and it's not really a pocket guide, and it does weigh about 3 pounds. My idea was to put the chips on the outside, so when you're flipping through the pages, you could see the chips and then match them up with the text. And we did the best we could to line up the chip pictures with the text so you could find out which issue you're looking for, because there's so many issues for some casinos where they have over 20 issues of chips. And then if I hadn't met Steve Wells to work on this book, I probably never would have finished this book, because he was very good at writing and getting things organized. I'm not very organized. And Jim Gillette, good dear friend of mine, passed away 6-7 years ago, but I'm sure many of us knew Jim Gillette, and he would meet we'd meet at his office, which was Carl's Jr., cheap office rent there, and trade chips. And he knew how much I was into the history. He would always say, get this written down, get the history and put out a book. And I did. Finally did. Can't believe in 1999 we came out with our first book, and 3 of them are out now, and hope to make many more. So let's see. That's for formatting, and for doing this book, I had to collect a lot of chips. Every chip I could find, I had to buy it, because back then we would trade chip for chip, or we would buy them for a quarter, 50 cents, $1. My limit was $3. If I was at the swap meet and it was over $3, or at yard sales, or at a little antique show, you might find a few chips. $3 was it. That was plenty. So I remember at one time my friend was with me, and there was a 50-cent Green Shack chip, and it was $3.50. The guy wouldn't take 3. So I said, "Yeah." My friend bought it instead. But later I bought his collection and I got it back and I still have it.
For a lot more than 350.
Yeah, put a couple of zeros on the end. And I used to trade with other collectors. Bill Payne, early on, was one of the early collectors. And just trade chips for chips. A couple chips here, a couple chips there. If you had a Bugsy chip maybe with a hole, usually they were found drilled. Remember one day I found 15 Bugsy chips, all with holes in them. The guy wanted face value. I had to cough up $75. I think I had to spend my whole savings at that time. And then for prices, that's always a challenge. And now with the internet and eBay, it's easier to track things. But I just get a good feeling for the prices and what's a good price to set on a chip. And going around collecting and buying chips for many, many years, I was able to figure, okay, if I get 100 of this chip and it's kind of like this chip, then this should be $3 or this should be $5. And then Jerry Wall came into the hobby and he was buying up every chip possible. So I would find the chips here and he'd come up from California, or we'd meet out at Peggy Sue's Diner in Yermo and do a big chip and cash trade. And he was finding chips and I would trade and build my collection and sell him chips to make money. And one time I had a chance to buy a bunch of El Rancho Vegas chips, 6,000 of them, buckets of them. It was 6,000 once we counted them, a buck a piece. So I borrowed money from my dad's friend, and within about 6 months or a year, I was able to pay him back because Jerry Wall was buying up chips, and he paid me $3 a piece for part of the chips. And my phone shouldn't be ringing. Okay. Glad everybody in the world knew I was here. So you would buy chips, trade chips. I'd find some and if I could find a big group of chips, then I would know how many there are. So then I could keep track of the rarities and put that in the book. Now with the internet and so many antique dealers and people just finding chips, it makes it a little bit tougher. I write letters probably every day. If somebody's got something on eBay I haven't seen in a while, or it's something rare and they're not somebody I know in the hobby, I'll send them a note through eBay and say, do you have any more of these? How many did you find? I'm trying to keep up with information from my book. Please help me out. Please help the hobby out and give me information. So it's fun to do and interesting to see the answers you get, and you don't always get the information that you're looking for. Sometimes they say, oh, we have, 1 to 10 or something. They don't want to tell you how many they have. And so that's part of the difficult part, but you got to talk to the people and get them to tell you how many chips there are so I can keep up with the rarities, keep up with the prices and everything. So the book, as you've seen, it's got the rarity ratings, which is very important. I think it's helped the hobby a lot with knowing how rare an item is. And it substantiates it. And then the 3 different values, the latest book having different grading, going all the way to perfect new condition, which you hardly ever find a chip new condition. Even some of them, when they're made, they're not always so perfect. But the 3 different prices, so we know, kind of what to pay in different conditions. And let's see, I gotta learn to read my writing here. Pictures of chips were very important. We felt by putting the pictures in the book, which was a huge step in taking all these photographs and getting them organized and continuing to take photographs, that if you see a picture, you're going to learn better. And that's how kids learn, right? They learn, they see pictures before they could read, they can learn and remember things. So the more chips, the more pictures you see, the better you're going to remember the chips. You see a bunch of rare chips, and you're going to remember, oh, that's a rare one. And you find it somewhere, you'll remember that's a rare one, and hopefully you can find it somewhere. And when we're out hunting chips and get a good deal on one, which is a lot harder to do these days with the internet and eBay and everything opening up. It's a lot tougher to find chips and make good deals on them. But that's why there's chip dealers. You come to the shows, you can buy more chips, and you can hopefully get real good deals, I think. And I was first collecting postcards, magazines, newspapers, anything old about Las Vegas. So I got into collecting the chips through old Vegas memorabilia, and it was postcards, and then dice, and then the chips. And as of this year, I believe I've been collecting the chips for 20 years now. Meeting with Harvey Fuller, another old timer in our hobby. Many are probably familiar with the name, and buying chips from him. And his chips were expensive. He had these Last Frontier $100 chips, the green ones and the brown ones. They were $7. That was a big price back 20 years ago. $7 for a nice chip. And the research, I've traveled all around Nevada. You go to courthouses, you dig through old newspapers, whatever they might have in museums, and document the dates of the casinos, because a lot of the information that Harvey Fuller had in his book was great. That was the gaming records that he could find, and a lot of them were 1948 and later. But digging through, researching through the old records of newspapers and all that, I found that a lot of these old clubs in Nevada, they had poker in the 20s. Even before live gaming legalized in 31, they were playing poker in little towns all over Nevada. Many of them aren't even around anymore, but we don't have chips from those towns. Usually it was just money. But I've come up with a lot of research and dates on clubs that were actually around a lot earlier all over Nevada than what was listed in previous books and information. And the research part, that's the fun part. And getting out to the small towns and talking to people. And you'll go hang out at a bar and you'll be talking to somebody, and they know somebody that might know somebody. And then it might be, and they'll tell you about some chips they have. And it might be 10 years later that I go back through Ely, and finally that person has found their chips. And then they end up being some tokens, which are good too. Tokens are fine, but they're not like chips like I really want. So I collected all the chips I could possibly get my hands on so I could put a book together. And then we went to other collectors. And one of the greatest collections we had a chance to photograph was Gene Grossblatt's. Gene had just a wonderful collection of chips. And Gene usually didn't stay up that real late at night. He seemed to be tired by maybe dark time. And we were at his house way past dark time. And it was about midnight. And he was still slowly digging out his albums out of the safe. And we were shooting photos of any chips that we felt we might never see again. And then when he passed on and his collection got dispersed, it would have been a lot harder to go and get all those pictures because now the chips are all over the place. And so photographing major collections early on was very important to know who had what, to keep track of the rarities, and just to get those photos before the chips are all dispersed all over the country. And doing the next book, I'm probably going to have to photograph at least 3 major collections just to get additional pictures of chips to try to get everything in there. That's the problem with me doing a book. I'm trying to get every single chip I can figure listed, and I got to just at one point say, okay, I got a publishing deadline. It's enough. I got to quit gathering more information. And I've got a lot of information to put in a new book, let me tell you, a ton of it. Let's see, chip values. Oh, I don't have a date as to when the next book will be out. I'm always working on it. I plan to do another book, but I don't have a date set with the publisher yet. Once I tell them, yes, I'm ready to do another book, and we agree on the book, they give me a date. And then I have to meet that deadline because they have to put the book in line with the 300 and something other titles that they produce a year. Schiffer Publishing is one of the biggest for antique and collectibles books. And so I haven't got a date set yet because I don't have time with moving and everything going on to sit down for 6 to 9 months and get it all put together. I mean, it won't be this year and it probably won't be next year, but maybe the end of next year or maybe early the year after, I look forward to finishing a book and continuing my research on that. Now, the values of chips, they've gone up a bit since I started collecting. And a lot of that is just, it's a great hobby. And more people are interested in early Vegas and early Nevada and just collecting memorabilia of the past. And chips are one of the neatest little items to collect. They're easy to deal with, easy to store, they're very colorful. And I can see the hobby just continuing and becoming more and more popular, especially with the internet. And now we have many nice websites. We have eBay, which is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a store, and we're always looking on there because you never know what's going to show up that you might just have to have. So then we get in the competition and bidding, and then we run the prices up, and prices go up and up. But even early on, when our club would have the auctions, that would set records. I remember it was the second show when the most expensive chip was $3,300, and that was the Resorts International $5 Baccarat chip. And that was, everybody was trying to complete Atlantic City, and that was the big thing. And then finally, after that, then the Vegas chips got to be more expensive and have surpassed most of the Atlantic City chips. But that early auction, it was $3,300. That was the big news. And then I think it was the same auction where Gene Grossblatt bought the Golden Goose chip, which is still the only one known. And that was around that same price, $3,000. And that was just at the beginning of our hobby. But for the most part, most chips were in the hundreds. A $1,000 chip was really expensive. I remember one day I bought a chip for $1,000, and my dad thought I was just crazy. He said, "Why would you spend that much for that old chip?" I'm glad I held on to it for a while. It's grown in value more than anything I could have invested in, except maybe land in Vegas. But land would have cost more, so I wouldn't have been able to buy that anyways. Well, I think that's pretty much how I put a book together and what I've been doing and collecting. And now we do questions or after Michael speaks? Oh, okay. Well, that'll be it for now.
I have nothing to add. Okay, so we live in Montana, and a couple months ago we took a short vacation, drove 1,500 miles through Montana and down to Cody, Wyoming, and through Yellowstone and back up. Stopped one night in one of the huge towns in Montana, Big Timber, Montana. Population of about, what, 5,000 or so, I think. 500, yeah. You're right, 5,000 is too high. And by the way, if you get there and you call it Big Timber, they know you're from out of town. It's Big Timber. In any case, so there's an antique shop there, right? And we decide, well, we'll walk in and see what, and it's mostly overpriced ranch stuff and farm stuff. Some neat old stuff, but all overpriced. And there's this case over there, and I walk over there because I always look in cases just to see if there are any chips there. And there are. By God, there are a bunch of them. And they're from Las Vegas and Reno and places like that. And all with very high prices on them. And sure enough, in the case is this card that says James V. Campiglia. Big Timber, Montana, of all places. We published the first chip rack, and all right, before I finish, the answer is June 1st, 2008 at 7:30 a.m. Line up now. I'm not going to answer that question again this weekend. Of course, if you ask Alan, you'll get a different answer, but you know, at least we're thinking about it. There will be an 11th edition of the chip rack. There will be a 3rd edition of the gaming table. We work on it constantly. Alan's working mostly on the chip rack. I'm working mostly on the gaming table. We exchange information back and forth. It's a constant updating. I can't think of a day in the last 5 years that I haven't entered information into the gaming table. I'm sure Alan can say the same thing about the chip rack. The wealth of information available demands constant input and updating. And just because you haven't seen a book doesn't mean it's sat there for the last 4 years with nothing happening to it. I think we published our first book in 1993. We published both the chip rack and the gaming table. I don't know how many of you have ever seen the first edition of the chip rack? Wow, only a couple. It wasn't that thick. And you know where it is now, 2 volumes to get all that stuff in there. We're in the 10th edition now. We will publish an 11th. The gaming table, interestingly, was how we got started in this thing. The gaming table was the first book we started working on. How many of you own the chip rack? Thank you. How many of you own the gaming table? A lot, but not quite as many. Our original thought was to put the gaming table together as a chip identifier, because all of us have come across chips with initials on them or obscure names with no place names, and we didn't know where they were from. And we figured, gee, wouldn't it be neat if we had a book that we could refer to that would tell us where these chips were from? People could look up their chips when they find them and know what they've got. The 3 of us lived in different cities, and this was before the internet, really. We wrote a lot of letters back and forth. We made phone calls. Prodigy, the Prodigy service, was one of 2 national online services, CompuServe being the other. that we could communicate on, and we sent emails back and forth through Prodigy too. We got together essentially because of the information booth, at least that, which I was then writing, a column I was then writing for the Club magazine. That's how we got to know that each other existed. Alan? Yeah, did everybody hear what Alan just said? One of the reasons that we started work on the gaming table is that Bill Borland's Blue Book had just recently come out, and it had a lot of good information in it, but it was essentially a price list, and some of the information we knew was wrong, and we thought we could do a better job than what Borland had done, make it more of more general interest for the hobby. We'll answer questions in a few minutes. We finally got together. We had been working on the gaming table for, I think, literally by mailing floppy disks back and forth. Each one of us would hold the database for a couple of months, add stuff to it, ship it on to the next person, and he'd add his stuff. We did that for a couple of years before we actually wound up in the same room together. And I think that was at the A&A convention in Chicago, wasn't it? When before we started having our own conventions, we used to have annual meetings in conjunction with the A&A annual meeting. And that was the first time we were actually in the same room together. And that was, I'm sorry? 90? And we decided where we wanted to go, and that's the point at which the chip rack was conceived. We don't use pictures. We never have. Part of the reason is that back in '93, when we started, when we first published, people didn't have scanners the way they do now. I mean, scanners now are $75, and scanning chips is a fairly easy process. It wasn't then. Printing in color is an expensive process. If you are familiar with the size of the chip rack, to put pictures in there would probably mean it'd have to be a 15-volume set, which nobody's going to carry around with them. So we rely on, rather than on photographs, and James has done a great job with them, what we do instead is use detailed descriptions. And sometimes, especially early on, it's not so much now, early on people would come to us and say, well, you have this chip in the book and it says it's purple, and here it is, it's lavender. People see colors differently, and no colors reproduce on a printed page the same way. No colors appear the same on computer screens the same way. Originally, when we published the chip rack, it was our chips, and that's what we had to work with. That's why it was not that thick. Now, over the last, almost 20 years now, we've had a lot of people show us their chips and send us color copies of their chips or scans of their chips. And that's what we rely on a lot to enter data and enter descriptions. Some of the scans, some of the color copies, some of the photographs we get don't show colors very well. And each of us sees colors slightly differently anyhow. So we have less of that now than we used to, though, I think. Alan?
Point of information. The first chip rack, I believe, had around 3,000 chips. Would that go right?
I don't recall. I should have looked it up. But
Now we're on 6,000.
Yeah, Alan, for those of you who didn't hear him, the first chip rack contained descriptions and values for about 3,000 chips. Right now, it stands at 26,000 chips. And that's a lot to put in a book. How many of you, of those of you who have the chip rack, how many of you have read the introduction? Most of you. How many have studied the descriptive material after the introduction describing mold designs and all that kind of stuff. About the same number. How many have read the notes at the end of the chip description sections? A few fewer, but still quite a few. What about the statistics in the second volume? A few fewer, but still quite a number. Ernie came up with the idea before we published the last TCR10 of putting in the timeline comparative pricing for each chip, which, how many of you have used that feature? Quite a few. I thought it was kind of cool to be able to track a chip over, was it 5 or 6 years, editions, that, and see what the trends have been and where it's gone. As with, we also get questions once in a while, well, somebody will call or write to us and say, well, you have this chip valued at $2,000 and I just paid $10,000 for it. How come it's valued at $2,000? I'm not sure why people expect us to be in every room at the same time and know exactly what somebody just paid for a chip. We have problems too with people who will call and say or write and say, oh, I just paid $10,000 for that chip. Okay, how? Oh, what do you mean how? I paid $10,000 for it. Yes, in cash? Well, no. I mean, I traded 5 other chips for it. Right. There's a big difference between laying out $10,000 in cash and trading 5 chips for one when you really only paid $20 a piece for the 5 chips anyhow. Have you really paid $10,000 for that chip? Or have you paid $100 for that chip? That's something we weigh, that's something we consider when we assign values to chips. Auctions is another example. Auctions are indicators of chip values, but they are not determinative in my mind. Why? Because, we'll take eBay as an example. The description, the title on eBay, determines who looks at that listing. Some people are more artful in writing titles than others. And there are chips that get missed because they're not described the same way. Somebody who puts up an auction, for example, that says $1 Grizzly Jacks is going to get fewer eyes looking at that auction than somebody who writes selling the same chip says $1 Montana, Big Fork Montana casino chip, and doesn't even say where it comes from. But having casino chip in the title of the auction is going to get more eyes focused on that auction for people who conduct searches for casino chips. Thanks, Jim. That's the first consideration. Second consideration is what the starting price is. There are people who just won't bid at all if the starting price is too high. Another consideration is whether the auction is a reserve auction or not. A lot of people, as a matter of principle, don't bid if there's a reserve price on an auction. I've never quite figured that out, but there are people who feel pretty strongly about that. So that eliminates even more people from the potential field of bidders. There are people who have bid, but don't happen to be sitting at their computers 5 minutes before the auction closes and don't have a sniping program and get closed out. If they had been there, the chip might well have gone for more. All of those things add up. In a live auction, even the club auction, it depends on who's in the room. Who happens to be in the room at the time, who happens to have the money to spend toward the end of the convention on something he'd like to own. All of these things limit the market and limit what people will pay for chips. So we don't consider, at least I don't, consider auction prices in and of themselves to be determinative of value. We'll answer questions in a couple minutes. I guess we will answer questions, because I don't know what else to tell you that you would be interested in. I could probably go on for hours, and so could James, but I'd rather answer questions that you have.
We're going to take questions from the audience now, but what you're going to have to do in order to be asked a question is you're going to have to stand. You're going to have to speak clearly and distinctly, and the responder is going to have to repeat your question because we're being videotaped and sound taped. So you need to stand or I'm not going to acknowledge you. I'm not going to acknowledge you, sir, unless you stand up and ask your question. Thank you.
I have a question. After chips from the casino, Caesar's Palace in Tahoe, there are non-value chips. Now, what happened was, the only thing I could figure out happened was they closed the casino so quickly that the pit bulls just took the day on non-value chips because they wasn't accounted for. Now, how can you place a value on chips like that?
The question is non-value chips.
Non-value chips, the casino closed quickly. As you know, the casino palace, the Caesar's Palace in Tahoe closed down. They said, boom, the next day it opened up to something else, and all the chips were counted up and but these are non-value chips.
Are they roulette chips or no cash value chips?
They don't get no cash value.
Are those the ones that are being sold on eBay?
Use the microphone.
What I'm saying is they would never circulate. These chips would never circulate.
Right, these are the ones that are being sold on eBay, the roulettes and the no cash value set of chips? Okay. Depending on how many there are, determines the value. And if they're put on eBay over and over again, the first few sets of them will bring X amount, but as they're put on over and over again, the value will go down. The people will see those for sale more often, and they'll realize, well, there's more of them, so we're not going to bid too much on them, because they'll wait and try to buy them cheaper. Common chips, as for the most part, don't do well on eBay because they're common. And when people look up the rarities in my book, or they see the chips over and over at the show, and they determine which ones are more common, they're not going to bring as much because they're always around. If it's really rare, everybody wants it, then they'll pay more because they want that chip. And to determine the value of those, most roulette chips fall in the range of $2 to $5, and a lot of no cash values go for about $3 to $10, depending on what they are, how nice they look. And Caesar's Tahoe's a rather popular place for collecting chips. If they were Vegas, there would be more demand. So it's supply, if there's a lot of them, demand, and how many times you see them for sale over and over. And if they become common, even if they weren't known previously, and not many of them were out previously, it's a new find coming to the market. And as they appear more, then the prices will maybe become more stable. Or a person selling them will say, okay, I'm getting $20 a set for them, I'll stick to that price and sell them at that price. Does that answer that question? Okay.
There's only one thing I'd like to add to that. Some people think we set prices. We don't. We don't look at a chip and say, well, we think that ought to be a $40 chip. What we do is try to monitor what the market's doing. We try to look to see what prices are changing hands at. And we look at that over a period of time. As James just said, if something starts appearing on eBay, you don't jump on the first closing price you see. You look to see if there are more being auctioned off. And then you average all that together. Same thing with chip. You'll see chips on the floor here. Same chip, different dealers can vary by a factor of 100%. So you look around, you see what the chips are worth to each individual dealer, what each individual asking price is, and you average them. But we don't set prices.
Our books are just guides, and I feel that basically I don't think anybody could have produced a color book and done what I had done without the help of Steve Wells and my partner in the book and my family and many collectors that helped me put the book together and to come out with that book. So we come out with the book and it's just a guide. They came out with a book early on, a guide as well, giving you the information about the chips and the prices that were what collectors were paying. And there's some chips where I have to compare that might be rare and you don't see that chip for sale because it's very rare, so you compare it to other chips. You know, the strip casino chips, for the most part, are bringing more than the downtown chips and more than chips from Reno, Tahoe, or small towns. And some of the small towns are more popular than other smaller towns in Nevada. But it has a lot to do with the mold, the inlay, and then there's the whole other thing, the condition of the chips. You might look around the show and you might find a $1 chip from the carousel. Common chip, brown chip with the building, a little carousel picture on it. I sold one on eBay the other day that was worn, had a chip out of it, and it went over $30. I actually felt bad it went for so much. Usually I've got them for sale for $10. But so you have the market on eBay where some things, because of demand and because it's appealing and new collectors will pay a lot, and then you've got the shows where you might find a better deal. Then you have eBay where it might go really reasonable really. So at the shows, sometimes there's great deals. On eBay, sometimes there's great deals. So it's really hard as authors of books to get all this put together. But we do a lot of work, and I do it every day, tracking eBay and networking with collectors to keep compiling information. And eventually, I need to just take all that information and get it done in another book. And as Michael mentioned, the early days with the colors of chips, that was really, really tough. I know I went to the scanner and to pay and got color copies and mailed many of them to Alan over the years to say, here's a chip that I found, put this in your book, and the colors wouldn't always be right. So you see things in books that are definitely different colors, and people see them different ways. But condition is a whole another factor. So something might be, you hear somebody, oh, it's $10,000 I paid. Well, they might have bought the best one known, and they feel that was what it was worth, but the book might say $1,000 or $2,000. But the only ones known that were put in there might have been chips in lesser condition, just in average condition or very good condition. Yes, Alan?
A lot of the chips that we see to put in the books are from scans. And as you know, on scans, sometimes you can't tell pink from orange in different colors. So unless you write to the person and you ask what color it is, you're not sure if they're putting down the right color.
And then they might see the color different because men and women see color differently. And a part of my book where my mom typed information, and Tammy is back there in the back room. She typed information for me as well, and she saw the colors a little different than I saw them. And then after I'm working on the book for quite a while, then Steve Wells, he's typing stuff in we're compiling information. Then he tells me he's basically colorblind.
We'll take this one next.
Another component of this gentleman's question that I actually get asked a lot, which really kind of two parts to that. One is, why does a chip that has no cash value have value? And how do these chips come to be available if they're not available at the casino, they're not freely for sale, this kind of stuff?
Okay, so the question is, where do those no cash value chips come from, and why do those no cash value chips have value? Gentlemen?
Well, everything has value. They just have less value because there's less demand for the no cash value chips as well as roulette chips. The chips with denominations, I believe the casinos would guard them closer, and they don't want the denominated chips out because you could try to take them to another casino and cash them in. When a casino closes, the Gaming Commission asks the casino to destroy all of their chips, and they're supposed to give them something back in writing, proof that the chips were destroyed. Now, when the Dunes closed, they were supposed to have been destroyed. The Dunes chips never got destroyed, the last issue golf course chips. So perhaps the casino didn't guard them so close. They weren't in the same locked up area, perhaps, and security or somebody working there got a chance to grab those boxes of chips and they got out. And sometimes some no cash value chips are very rare where they're only taken away in some tournaments. And other times, a lot of them come out. The same with the roulette chips. And in the old days, the chips with denominations would come out that way. Years ago, the $100 chips, everybody wanted old $100 chips, and they were the more expensive chips because they were $100 chips. And most people didn't just walk out with a $100 chip. And now it's changed. Most $100 and $5 chips, most say 15 years ago were $5. But the $100 chips, it's a $100 chip, it's $20. Well, now rarity plays a role, and there's more demand for dollars and fives, so therefore dollars and fives are more expensive. But the casino I have found over the years in buying boxes of chips that the management might take home the $100 chips, their highest denomination chips, because those were the best ones to take home and play poker with. And the 1s and 5s walked out with customers. The 25s might have been kept, but a lot of the old chips were destroyed. But if they were destroyed, a lot of times somebody grabbed a box of $100 chips because those looked the best to take home.
Dick, in honor of your terrific work at this convention and the fact that you're taking pictures, your question's next.
Would either of the authors like to expand on the color in as much as would be clay chips, where a batch is made, color is added to the clay, and even some of the samples from the manufacturers have the same name on it, yet they are distinctly different colors, and how that also affects how one perceives colors?
We're talking once again about colors. It's very interesting this morning, and the question is the color that's mixed into the clay. Okay, gentlemen?
Dick's point, I think, is that manufacturers are not consistent themselves on colors, and it's absolutely true. I mean, you'll see chips from the same casino with slight color variations, even though the inlay is the same, the mold design's the same, the edge inserts are the same. You'll see slight color variation. It was just a reorder, and it's virtually impossible. Any woman who's ever knitted knows that it's virtually impossible to match a dye lot once you've bought yarn and try to go back and find more of it. Same thing happens with chips. There's also another factor, though, and especially with older chips, it's difficult to know what the original color was. Chips darken as they're played with because they absorb oil from fingers, as well as chip munge, which is that gray stuff that gets yucky. The colors used around the turn of the century by B.C. Wills, for example, have little relation to the colors used today. There certainly weren't fluorescent colors available then. Black was black, red was red. You get into other color variations, not so easy. Sunlight fades chips, fluorescent lights fade chips. The only way in some cases to tell what the real color of an old chip was is to break it in half and look at the color inside. Go ahead. Let us know. And it's just an unfortunate. We tried at one time, as a matter of fact, and Dick was partially responsible for working on this for a while. The Standards and Archives Committee tried to come up with a color standard to use for the hobby, a description standard, so that everybody knew what everybody was talking about when they said purple as opposed to lavender. It doesn't work. There are too many variations. There was no real standard to use. There is a printer's guide to colors that costs, I mean, it's a little kind of a color sample chart. It costs $500. I don't think any of us are going to buy $500 sample color books and carry them around with us. Barring that, it's very difficult to standardize color descriptions. Alan?
Different manufacturers have color guides,
And they're different too, yeah. Different, Alan's point was, and I thought I had said this before, but different manufacturers have their own color guides, and they're not consistent. Not only with each other, they're not consistent with themselves from batch to batch. Is that what you were getting at?
Yes, sir.
This gentleman was next because I ignored him before.
At any given time, there's about 20,000 chips for sale on eBay. How the hell do you keep track of all those transactions when you're coming up with your prices? I know you got to eliminate the really highs and the really lows, but how do you find the center point on that to find the true value?
The question is, eBay has 20,000 chips for sale at any time. How do our gentlemen up here track those prices and pay attention to them?
We don't. No, I mean, it's a fair question, but it's impossible, and that's what you're saying. On the other hand, of those 20,000 chips, maybe 100 or 200 are really unusual. The rest are selling for the same price they've been selling for before. They're selling for the same prices we've got in our books, same values. There's no need to track them. What you look for is something that's really unusual or something that seems to be coming out in quantities or may be coming out in quantities, or you look for things that may be trending in one direction or another. But other than that, no, I don't think we certainly try to track every chip on eBay. James, you have?
Of those 20,000 chips, so now eBay now has it broken down where you can look up individual chips. Of the 20,000, I think that would include a lot of the poker sets that are out there, a lot of the markers that people are selling just for poker markers. So you've got to look in the part of just the casino chips. Although eBay's changed that, people still mix their poker sets and all that in with our old casino chips. I look under the completed items, highest price, completed. I look under that every day. If I'm gone for a few days, then I'll look under the completed auctions, and usually about every couple weeks I'll just check all the completed auctions and make notes of what's been selling. And it also depends on who's buying the chip. If you've got some of the strong bidders paying attention to some chips, the prices might go higher, and the prices will also go higher in the wintertime. I don't know if I should tell you that or not, because that's kind of my thing. I try to sell more in the wintertime because people have a whole bunch to do, so they're bidding on chips when it's freezing cold somewhere. And in the summertime, they're out traveling, so you can get better deals in the summertime. So that's another factor.
And if I can add some. And not surprisingly, prices go down before and after the convention, because people are saving money for the convention to spend here, and when they get home, they got none left.
I got to run home now and do some adjusting. Yes.
So I guess I had a comment. It's just on your eBay, why I know on eBay sometimes if it's a chip I'm looking for or to complete my collection or something like that, I might be willing to pay more. Even in the convention, I might, if it's something I need, I might be willing to pay a lot more. Also want to thank all of you for these guys and the tremendous amount of work that went into it.
So that wasn't exactly a question for the microphone. That was a laudatory comment to our two gentlemen up here.
There was a comment.
Okay.
I think you're exactly right. One of the things that we see often is that if someone's collecting a set of chips and there are 40 chips in the set and they need one to finish the collection, they're going to be willing to pay a lot more than I will when I'm just looking around for chips. And that's a good point.
Gentleman with the hat on backwards. Okay, so the question, as I understand it, has to do with the rarity rating. Are you talking about James's rarity? Okay. For those of you, does everybody in the room have this third edition of the CW? Okay, if you don't, and you're not familiar with it, James rates his chips from R1 to R10. Okay, and without making rocket science out of this, R10 is the rarest of all, and then it goes into a unique category, and I believe you're referencing to eBay, where there are a lot of people selling, and they will quote the rarity level out of James' book, and some people won't quote the rarity level. James, you want to take that?
And some will use my book, and sometimes if their chips are higher priced than the chip rack, they'll quote the chip rack prices. And both of our books are, a couple years old or more right now, but they're still guides and they're still very, very useful. Not all prices have changed completely, but it's very frustrating on eBay where it's not the collectors that we know for the most part that are bound by that are members of our club and respect others. It's just people that find chips, and there may be an antique shop somewhere, or somebody just wants to capitalize on their find, and they see in my book it's rarity 9 or rarity 10, and there's only a few chips, yet they've got several of them, and they keep running them over and over again. A good example, I forget exactly which issue it is, but it's one of the Herald's Club portrait chips. It's a pink $1 chip, and the guy keeps putting it up there as rarity 10. He's put about 6 of them up there as rarity 10. He should be able to figure out by looking at my book that it's not rarity 10 anymore. And other collectors find that, and other collectors write to me and tell me about that and point these auctions out, which is great when other collectors send me a link to something on eBay just to make sure that I've seen it so I can keep track of the rarity, especially on the very rare chips. If it's rarity 5, which is basically there's a box of them, around 100 chips known, well, a few more chips isn't going to make any difference. But if there's another box, then it would make a big change. But I do the best I can to write to the people on eBay and ask them for information, and a lot of them are helpful, but a lot of them don't want to tell you what they really have. So, and it'd be nice to have something where we could keep up these rarities maybe on a weekly basis, some kind of internet format, and it's been talked about, but it hasn't come into play yet. But I would like to be part of something like that, so we have a website for all of us to go to and see about new finds and rarity changes, and maybe even report big prices that are paid for chips, and maybe even have a reason as to why a big price was paid or why something went really cheap on eBay. We've got the chipboard, and we talk a lot about chips on all kinds of subjects on the chipboard. Actually, I talk a bunch about everything.
I think part of your question implied, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think part of what you were asking was, why do some sellers continue to quote a rarity level that's higher than they should know about because they've got a ton of these chips? And, well, the answer is because they get more money for it that way. It's simple. Why tell somebody you've got a jillion of something if it's worth 10 cents that way and $50 if you don't tell them? There's no incentive for a seller to say, well, I found 5,000 of these, when he can get $50 a piece for them. You asked another question, and that is, how, as I recall, how can one box of chips, 100 chips, affect value significantly? Let me take a quick poll. How many in this room would spend $10,000 for a casino chip? 2. How many would spend $1,000 for a chip? Looks like, well, you voted already, jeez. Try again. How many would spend $1,000 for a chip? Okay, looks like about a dozen. How many would spend $50 for a good chip? People who haven't voted already. Okay, all right, here's my point. 2 people in this room would spend $10,000 for a casino chip that they wanted. You suddenly find 100 of those. What's the value going to be? Once those 2 people have it, ain't nobody else going to pay $10,000. And that's what determines value, and that's what determines that's what determines trends. Once the 2 people willing to spend $10,000 for a chip have it, you have no market left. This is still a fairly young, all things considered, hobby, with a fairly small number of people interested in it. And because there are only a few of us, how many chips can be sold? How many chips can this hobby absorb and not affect value? It depends on how much money you're talking about, But even a $5 chip, how many people, it depends on what chip it is, obviously. If it's a $5 chip from a poker room in Montana, I seriously doubt that that's going to demand the kind of interest that a $5 chip from a new Planet Hollywood, for example, would. Fewer people are going to want it. Because fewer people want it, same number of chips, the price is going to be lower. So it's always a supply and demand kind of thing, but it's also a matter of how many people are actually interested. Well, that's the demand, isn't it? I mean, how many people can afford a chip at that level? How many people are willing to pay for it? You asked another question, sort of, and that is, how come there isn't some sort of information exchange so we know on a daily basis what's been found? You can figure out a way to do it, more power to you. But like I said, we cannot be, laws of physics can't be in every room at the same time. So we rely on people to tell us about new finds. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't until they sell as many as they can at the old high price, knowing that it will drop as soon as people know how many there are. There are others, as James said, who aren't members of the club, who aren't really chip collectors. They come across a box of something, they don't know what they're worth. They've never seen his book or ours. They don't have any concept of rarity. They just say, well, people seem to be paying $10 for these things, let's see if I can get them. And they sell some at $10, you know. James's book and ours, TCR, approaches rarity from different angles. TCR says you can figure out rarity based on value. Z chips are clearly rarer than A chips. So we sort of took the sliding scale approach and said rarity is less important than value, or rarity determines value, so everybody can figure out which chips are rarer than others. James said, let's assign a specific value to chips based on what we know today. And with any book, any price guide, TCR, James's book, any other book, the minute we publish, or the minute we cut off data entry so that we can publish, we'll be out of date. Somebody will find a box of something the next day. Some casino will open in Nevada and issue new chips. Some casino in Nevada will change hands and issue new chips because of that. So no book will ever be up to date. Alan?
Rarity doesn't always determine value. You can have an ugly roulette chip where there's one of, and a pretty Las Vegas chip where there's a bunch of, well, I think it's a chip will without.
Yeah, Alan's point is rarity is not the only determinant of value, that because you can find a really pretty roulette chip from somewhere and it'll be much less valuable than an ugly chip from Las Vegas with a denomination on it. Absolutely true. There's also cachet. Bugsy chips will always command a premium because everybody wants to hold a piece of stuff in their hands that Bugsy Siegel had in his hand, or at least his staff did, on December 26, 1946, when the Flamingo opened. I mean, this is a piece of, even though there were already 2 casinos on the Strip, which Hollywood would just as soon you forget, and there were still a bunch of clubs downtown, which Hollywood never mentions either. Several of them Bugsy owned before he built the Flamingo. But the Flamingo has a cachet that Westward Ho didn't. And one day, Westward Ho chips will be as old as Flamingo chips, and it won't make any difference.
Sam, you come forward a little bit when you ask your question so we can all hear it.
Any thoughts on doing an internet-based price guide, even if by subscription?
The question is an internet price guide, which I think everybody in the room have thought about, and so you guys can have at that one.
At this time, not for myself, because I'm in a contract with Schiffer Publishing Company. They produce books. They don't want me selling information on the internet, and I have to stick to that contract, so they will continue to produce the full-color price guides that we all would like to see, and a nice book to carry around. And they do not do internet, and I am not supposed to do anything with chips outside of doing the book. Actually, the contract, any books that I have a plan to do related to collectibles, I'm supposed to run it by them first, so they have a chance to publish it. And I'd like to make one quick comment on the chip, the $10,000 chip, and then maybe a chip becoming not worth much if 100 of them are found. If a box of 100 chips is found, okay, there's two chips known, brings 10,000 apiece. But if a box of 100 of them is found, depending on what it is, it could still have some pretty good value. It could still be in the several $100 price range. And that gives everybody or more people a chance to own that chip. And in time, the value might rise on that chip because it's a nice chip that a lot of people want. And still, with 100 chips, that's limiting just 100 people to own that chip, or 102 people if there were two known previously. But in the 20 years of collecting and tracking chips, most of the very rare chips from the strip casinos as well as downtown, for the most part, the rare Vegas chips from casinos that have been here for many years, they destroyed the chips. The dunes and the sands and the flamingo, they either drilled holes for keychains or the casinos destroyed the chips. And huge hordes of these just do not show up. For the most part, of chips that I've bought for a lot of money, they have not shown up in quantity, and the value hasn't been ruined on them. But if they do, then more people have an opportunity to buy chips. And that's, in the past, I've had chips where I've only had one or two, and then a box shows up. Well, you price them at a different price, set a reasonable price, and then everybody buys them, and everybody has a chance to enjoy those. But like I say, 100 chips is not that much. And usually if chips do show up, it usually is only maybe a box of 100. But usually it's only a handful, which might not affect the value much at all. Not often does a hoard show up where there's 5,000 of something where all of a sudden it's worth $3, where it was worth 1,000 the day before. Yes, Alan?
If you sell 2 chips for 10,000 each, that's $20,000. If you sell 100 chips for 200 each, it's still $20,000.
That's the way I look at it as well. In time, you'll still get the same amount of money. And you'll have more happy collectors, especially if they know exactly how many were found. And that was one of the points of doing the rarity. I felt that people need to know how many chips exist to substantiate the values of the chips. And a lot of people just want the really rare chips. Of course, if you're only buying rarity 8, 9, 10, chips where there's 15 or less known, you're taking a chance that the value might come down, but you're also you're owning something that's very rare, and there's more demand for the very rare, and the values have gone up and up and up. This hobby is doing great, and it's been doing great for many years. And I am involved in many hobbies, and this hobby is where I spend most of the time. But the chips are just unbelievable. I don't see it slowing down. Everybody wants rare chips. They're colorful pieces of art, and they're to be appreciated.
I think we'll take the last question, the showroom floor. Yes. Were any chips recovered from where? Were any chips recovered from the Stardust dig? I heard a rumor yesterday that there was something found. I think it was tokens, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's call it off at this point. I want to thank our gentlemen from the guides.